Well, hello out there in podcast land, and welcome back to the Front Row Network and a special bonus show. We promised it. We're doing it. It is finally time to reveal your votes, your picks for the ultimate 90s movie and for the NIT 90s Invitational Tournament. The brackets that we did seems like forever ago. It was over a year that we did these brackets. We replayed the episodes for our hiatus hits, but we put these brackets up on Brackify so that you, the listener, can have your say and tell us where we went wildly wrong. So this is a special episode to recap what you had to say. We're going to go and break these down. But first, let me welcome aboard in the control center with us tonight, the editor-in-chief of the Front Row Network, Mr. Jeremy Geckner. Welcome, Jeremy.
So happy to be back to recount the triumphs, the heartbreaks, and the what the hell moments of the 90s bracket.
They were a lot. I went back because what we're going to do is we're going to do some compare and contrast tonight.
Oh, yeah.
We are going to, not only we're going to give you your results from Brackify, but we are also going to compare them to our votes. And I looked at our NIT bracket, and that is just a crazy fever dream of a bracket. When I looked to see where we ended up.
You know, it's pretty appropriate me being on this episode too, considering Sarah and I were probably the key culprits of why that movie won the NIT bracket.
Correct. Yes. I think we've learned a lesson on a 5-panel team. We can't have a married couple.
That's true.
We learned our lesson in the Disney bracket, and we had 2 married couples for that one.
The gorgeous flowing locks of Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. I mean, nobody can resist that.
Oh, sure. We'll go with that.
And Antonio Banderas. Come on, man. It's like a vampire meat sandwich.
All right. So let's see how it did. We're going to start because we had a great response to both brackets. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start with the NIT, the 90s Invitational Tournament. This was the supplemental tournament that we did for the movies that we thought were great, but we couldn't just fit into the big bracket of 64. So we put this up. We've got, much like the regular NIT, this one got a good response, but not as maybe not as many eyeballs as the big dance. But I think that means it's kind of fun because the margin of error is pretty small, and these brackets are bonkers.
This is bananas, people.
So, okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go region by region instead of round by round. I thought it might be a little easier for us to follow. So let's start right off the bat with our comedy region. So for those of you who don't remember, it was Ace Ventura versus Singles, Mallrats versus Can't Hardly Wait, Happy Gilmore versus The Birdcage, and White Man Can't Jump versus Reality Bites. So we had 4 matchups there. And actually, this opening round region, 3 of the 4 matchups matched. We agreed with you, the listener. Ace Ventura dominated Half Baked, 32-5. Mallrats over Can't Hardly Wait, 22-14. Happy Gilmore over, I'll get to that one in a second. And White Men Can't Jump over Reality Bites, 30-6. The one where we differed is Happy Gilmore versus The Birdcage. Our panel voted The Birdcage. And not only did we vote for The Birdcage in this round, we voted for this to win the comedy region.
That's
this
right.
made it all the way to the Final Four. The listeners, not so much. And not so much, by a wide margin, 28-8, Happy Gilmore takes out The Birdcage in the opening round. The listeners have already busted our brackets.
You know what's weird though about this is, like, you think about just the pure star power logistics of that matchup, and it's kind of stupid. I mean,
it is. I mean, when you compare, you've got Robin Williams and Gene Hackman and Nathan Lane and
Diane Wiest and friggin' Callista Flockhart. Yeah. I mean,
but on the other hand, you've got Adam Sandler, Bob Barker, and Carl Weathers.
Bob Barker, yeah.
So love me some Carl Weathers.
Apollo Creed. I mean, It's not that I don't have a fond place in my heart for Happy Gilmore. I grew up watching it. I can probably quote the whole thing if I tried. I'm not an Adam Sandler fan. I can appreciate some of his movies, but eventually the Dabby Doobie shtick just wears really thin on me. And what I found in this matchup though is that the Birdcage, I find that I can watch that one and enjoy it more as I get older. And so maybe that's where it's at. I kind of went for my critic hat as opposed to my nostalgia hat there.
Sure. Well, I think our audience went with the nostalgia hat, or at least maybe even the sports hat.
That's true.
By going with the sports movie. And as I mentioned, it not only advances out of the first round, it then takes down another sports movie and my personal favorite, White Men Can't Jump.
How is that going for you?
This stung a little bit, but I get it. Listen, I love White Men Can't Jump. It's quintessential 90s to me. I can watch it any day and it will never get old. That said, Adam Sandler is maybe the second biggest comedy star of the 90s. So if we are looking at it from a nostalgia purpose, I get it. I'm not too mad at it, but it actually advances over White Man Can't Jump by a score of 20-6. So again, not a close score there. And it actually it takes the Birdcage's spot in the finals of the comedy region against the movie that we picked to go to the finals as well, or to the next round, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. We picked it over Mallrats. You picked it over Mallrats. And again, this one was not a close one as well. The final score ended up being 19-7. Ace Ventura advances over Happy Gilmore. And so this is where we diverge a little bit. And now we really have kind of a pretty great matchup here, Jim Carrey versus Adam Sandler.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the second biggest comedy star of the 90s. Well, this is the biggest comedy star of the 90s, just 1994 alone. But it is an interesting scenario here because I'm wondering, I would love to know what the demographic age of some of the voters are because, most people... most younger moviegoers now probably don't know that much about these two actors, aside from, I don't know, Jack and Jill and Grown Ups,
Sure.
or the number 23, or,
Well, I would guess, you would know if you're a younger listener, and please tweet at us if you're wrong. But I would also guess you would know Jim Carrey more from later 2000s, Mr. Popper's Penguins and the Dick Jane and the family oriented stuff,
or like Burt Wonderstone,
right?
Yeah.
And if you know of Adam Sandler's work, post 2002. I just feel kind of sorry for you.
God, man. That Punch Drunk Love right there. You just couldn't build that momentum.
That was it.
What? Just as one little sidebar, that's the reason I can't stand Adam Sandler is because I know he can act. He's shown me he can act, and he chooses not to. And it just pisses me off. He
chooses to make really fun vacation videos with his buddies.
Yeah, there you go.
Get it sponsored by Subway and call it a day. So, hey, good for him.
Yep.
So what isn't good for him is he's not going to advance.
Nope.
According to our listeners, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective advances to the final four of this bracket. It wins the comedy region of the NIT in a fairly close vote. Now, keep in mind, the way that Brackify works is you have to vote to keep it moving on. So these numbers are going to get less impressive as we get closer to the championship because a lot of people have different votes that they end up, or different movies that they take all the way. So the vote here is 10-7. So it's not, but that also means that there's a lot of other comedies that some people would have rather see advance. Mallrats. So the five people who did get it vote for it out of the first round wanted it to advance to the final four. So just to kind of explain that. So there you have the Birdcage. The Birdcage is our Final Four pick, but Ace Ventura: Pet Detective is your Final Four pick, and I think I gotta say it's a solid pick.
Yeah, I mean that was the one that most people complained about, not being on the regular bracket. So, this is the 18-win Syracuse team that doesn't, barely doesn't make the tournament type thing.
Exactly. And, I made it a rule when we did the big dance to only have one Jim Carrey movie on there. And I picked Dumb and Dumber because I thought it had a little bit more impression in the modern day culture. It had a sequel. It had a prequel. I guess Ace Ventura had a sequel too. And technically there was Ace Ventura Jr., which we won't talk
there's
about.
Son of Ace Ventura coming out now too.
Oh, good Lord. But anyway, I digress. So let's move over to the action bracket. And this action bracket is pretty interesting as well.
So weird. So weird, this bracket.
Now things are going to start to get nutty, folks. So just to recap, our opening matchups were The Fugitive versus Con Air, Total Recall versus Reservoir Dogs, The Fifth Element versus Blade, and Point Break versus Dick Tracy. So,
oh, man.
The audience agreed with us that The Fugitive deserved to be a number one seed. It beats Con Air 23-13. Here's where things are going to get a little off, though, folks. So we had Blade advancing over The Fifth Element. You had The Fifth Element advancing in a really close matchup, I should say, 19-17. That one advances.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was a Fifth Element voter on that one too. So good to be validated by the fans. Well,
good. Well, enjoy that flavor now because I'm taking it back in a little bit.
Yes, you are.
And it goes up against Point Break, which actually we voted for to advance, as well did the audience, 25-11. It advances over Dick Tracy. And then that gets us to our final matchup in this round, which is Total Recall versus Reservoir Dogs. Now, we had a fairly vocal anti-Tarantino contingent
named Scott
on the panel. Yes. And to a lesser degree, Craig.
Yeah.
I don't remember I believe they both voted against Reservoir Dogs in this, but
yeah.
So they sent Total Recall to advance. I didn't. I voted for Reservoir Dogs, but
yeah.
And I agree with the listeners because they actually, by a 3-1 margin, 27-9, Reservoir Dogs advances.
Yeah, I was not ready for the amount of Reservoir Dog love that the fans have here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
It really is, because not only does it advance out of this round, it moves on to the Final Four. It ends up winning the drama or the action bracket by beating The Fifth Element, another movie we didn't vote for. So your finals ended up being Reservoir Dogs versus The Fifth Element, which is the exact opposite of our finals, which was The Fugitive versus Blade.
And I'll tell you this, by the way, though, is like the matchup there between Reservoir Dogs and The Fifth Element was insanely close, which, I mean, I'm just saying, like that. The Fifth Element, I don't think gets as much love as it deserves. Yes, it's bonkers, it's bananas, people, but it's also just the right amount of bonkers. And I mean,
it is a close vote. It's another 10-7 vote. Reservoir Dogs over The Fifth Element. What's interesting is Reservoir Dogs taking out The Fugitive in the previous round. It ends up winning by a score of 14-9, which is
a wider margin.
Close. Yeah, it's interesting that Reservoir Dogs, because truth be told, I don't know if I love it, but I don't know if it's a great action movie but it does have a lot of like 90s.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you there, but I mean, by the same token, I mean, calling The Fugitive an action movie feels right, but also kind of like, meh. You could easily classify it as a drama as well. That's why, suspense movie is really more where that would probably fall in. And that does usually fall under that action bracket,
Right. So there's your finals. It it's Reservoir Dogs over The Fifth Element to win the action region. It's going to go on to take on Ace Ventura in the final four. So let's move to the other side of the bracket, and we will start with the family section. This was again split in half. Half of this region is family, half of this is romance. So we had the Sandlot versus Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Mighty Ducks versus Cool Runnings.
These are impossible choices.
They really are, which is part of the fun that I get from making these, is making people destroy their childhoods. For me.
Your heartbreak is delicious.
Yeah. So we picked the Sandlot to beat Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, picked the Mighty Ducks over Cool Runnings, and that's exactly what you picked as well. The Sandlot beats Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 26-11, and the Mighty Ducks crushed Cool Runnings.
Yeah, man, the Jamaican bobsled team has faded into history, people.
Yeah, yes, very much so. And then we also agreed on who should advance between the two. We voted for the Sandlot over the Mighty Ducks, and you did as well. That one advances by a score of 20 to, where was it at here? 20-4. So
yeah, that's a
destruction.
That is a destruction. That's like a 16 over a 1 or a 1 over a 16, man.
Yeah,
like,
clearly the Sandlot's got a lot of love, and maybe it's the 25th anniversary thing, and the photo at the baseball game, and it's still
could be
really embedded. The Mighty Ducks maybe it wore out its welcome by the third movie, and it's just it didn't have enough steam to go all the way.
Yeah, I agree. It's a worthy pick.
Yeah. So it goes up against the winner of the romance categories. This was 2 wedding movies: The Wedding Singer versus Four Weddings and a Funeral, and then the other matchup, a very testy matchup that we had on the podcast, The American President versus As Good as It Gets. Let's start with the obvious one. We all went with The Wedding Singer over Four Weddings and a Funeral. You did as well. 30-4. It advances. We part company here. The panel picked Aaron Sorkin's The American President to advance. You, the listener, however, chose As Good as It Gets in, I believe, the closest matchup in the first round.
It was
18-16. People love them some Jack Nicholson.
This is contentious for me, not just because I am an Aaron Sorkin acolyte, but I don't even remember that much of As Good as It Gets. All right. I remember Nicholson's Oscar clip speech about, what he does to how he writes women, which is great. Look, the script for As Good as It Gets is awesome, but I'm having trouble remembering the beats that made it like a great award-worthy movie. Mm-hmm. And I don't have that problem with The American President because Aaron Sorkin, every freaking scene he writes is worthy of an Oscar. So it's like, this one I just don't get, especially in the political times we live in, how that movie doesn't have more prevalence, or maybe it's because it's political and stuff like that.
And that's my contention. And I think I said this way back a year ago when we did this on the podcast, is that Aaron Sorkin has a very specific window, I think, in 2 regards. I think it's the political window, and then it's his style of dialogue, which I love his style of dialogue, but in the way that a great guitarist, when you hear a lick, that's Clapton or B.B. King or whoever. When you hear Sorkin dialogue, it's Sorkin. But not everybody's a fan of like the rat-a-tat-tat style where everybody in the world, has a smart quip at the moment,
Everybody studied at Vassar or Harvard to linguistics and stuff.
Right, exactly. And you also, he wears his politics on his sleeve. So if you are the person who doesn't agree with his politics, I don't know if you find if you're going to find The American President a movie you're going to relate to.
Yeah.
So, especially when, like, I mentioned this on the podcast, the big climactic speech is not only a profession of love, it's also a brazen support for the ACLU and for gun control.
Yeah.
Which, again, if you support those things, you're on board. But if you don't, maybe you're just going to go with the one with Jack Nicholson and the dog.
I mean, the logic makes sense. Even if I have to swallow it bitterly, I will.
So we end up getting a matchup. But so for those mad as good as it gets for advancing over the American president, I have good news for you. It does not advance any further. It actually gets eliminated by The Wedding Singer.
Pretty handily.
Very handily. Actually, The Wedding Singer got the most votes in the Sweet 16 round. It got 21 votes in this round. So that is enough to beat the 5 votes that as good as it gets received in this round. So The Wedding wins the romance bracket category, and it actually goes up against the Sandlot in the Elite 8. Now, we actually had the Sandlot versus the American president, and because we were in the Sorkin neophyte den, American president easily advanced over the Sandlot. Not the case with our listeners. Nope. In fact, the Sandlot beat The Wedding Singer. It advances to the final 4. And the Sandlot actually, The Wedding Singer had the most votes in the Sweet 16. The Sandlot actually get the most votes out of any movie in the Elite 8. So it actually advances by a score of 17-3. So Sandlot ends up. It's
interesting to contrast the 2 Adam Sandler movies that made it to the Elite 8 as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know a lot of people who would say that The Wedding Singer is a better movie than Happy Gilmore. And that it's probably a more iconic performance from Adam Sandler. So, I mean, that's pretty interesting that, the fervor for taking Happy Gilmore further was better than the one for The Wedding Singer.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's interesting to me because I agree. I think The Wedding Singer's probably the best Adam Sandler performance, non-dramatic aside.
Sure,
probably like it's the best of both worlds. It's like his version of Coming to America, where he's going to give you some broad stuff, but then he can do the sweet romantic stuff, and you buy it. And he really,
right? He's restraining his comedic tendencies, so that in a way it makes his subtle comedy funnier and more earnest.
Right. And then he still has those moments of, the angry, man child that he doesn't have. But for me, I think, and we discussed this on the panel, when movies are set in a certain time period, sometimes it removes the stamp of when it came out. Mm-hmm. And which is why the Sandlot versus The Wedding Singer is such an interesting matchup, because it's a movie set in the 60s versus a movie set in the 80s,
right?
Both of which came out in the 90s. So for me, if you put Happy Gilmore and Wedding Singer in a 90s bracket, I'd probably vote Happy Gilmore, even though I think maybe Wedding Singer is a more well-rounded movie.
Yeah. I mean, I could totally see that. There are some more, I think, probably belly laugh out loud moments in Happy Gilmore, but it's just a very, very interesting thing to see what the voters went after when it came to Adam Sandler in particular in this bracket.
Right. So let's move on to our final region, and that is the drama category. So here were our matchups: American Beauty versus Natural Born Killers, Philadelphia versus The Truman Show, Interview with the Vampire versus Trainspotting, and Fargo versus The Firm. This one was...
Those are just terrible choices, man.
Well, what's interesting is these 4 matchups, we only agreed with the listeners on one of them.
Yep.
We agreed that Interview with the Vampire should advance over Trainspotting, although what's interesting is that in order to advance on Bracket Fight, it actually tied with Trainspotting in the first round, 17-17.
Wow.
The tiebreaker comes with total votes cast then, meaning how far did people advance these movies once they filled out the entire bracket. And Interview with the Vampire got 37 total votes. Trainspotting got 27. Yep. So it's going to advance. So that's the only way.
Is a win, man.
So it actually goes up against Fargo, which defeats The Firm.
That's correct. That is the correct choice.
That is the correct choice. This again. I don't know what we were thinking. I don't know who voted for what. I'm gonna retcon this and say I voted for Fargo, so I was right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure there's no way I would have chosen The Firm over Fargo.
But maybe I just got caught up in the guilt over not having a John
I think the main argument was something about Grisham, just like how he was the biggest author of the 90s, and like, oh, it makes sense that like this is probably one of his most recognizable movies of the 90s. I think that was the reasoning.
That I could see that, and maybe I got swept up in some mob mentality and was like, yeah, that's a salient point. But yeah, no. I mean,
of course, it could have been Sarah and I sabotaging it for Interview with the Vampire. You never know. You'll have to go back and listen.
I will, and you all should go back and listen in our archives and on our YouTube page where you can watch us argue about this in real time.
That's right.
So the other matchups, American Beauty over Natural Born Killers. You voted for American Beauty 19-15. We went with Natural Born Killers.
Yeah.
I'm really surprised by this.
Yeah.
For a couple of reasons. Well, let's just get the most obvious out of the way. It's really surprised to see a Kevin Spacey movie advance right now.
Yeah, I mean,
which means you must either really like American Beauty or really hate Natural Born Killers. And maybe if it's up against any other movie, because Natural Born Killers is a pretty polarizing movie of its own.
Yeah, just a little.
Right. So I'm a little surprised by that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, you're right. Like the Kevin Spacey aspect can't be dismissed here.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I think American Beauty is one of the best movies ever made. It's in my personal top 100. I just think it's a gorgeous film. Dialogue, performances, storyline, everything. But yeah, it was hard to reconcile this. I mean, like Kevin Spacey is not accused of being lecherous. I mean, there's child things involved here, so
right.
So it's really hard to separate the art out. Now, at the same time, Natural Born Killers was deliberately controversial, and man, did it land its controversialness, especially if you see the uncut version. So it's a very strange matchup there, and I think this is probably one that I was most conflicted about, because I think American Beauty is the better film, but I often didn't know if it had aged well enough. I think that Natural Born Killers is a pretty timeless movie just because of its style tendency.
Yeah, and I think it's also really representative of the 90s in so many ways, from the Tarantino rewrites to Oliver Stone's, his style of direction, especially during that time period. And
the quick cuts, the manicness. I mean, it's so Stone.
Yeah, it's commentary on the media. It's speaking more about the moment. Offline, or maybe we could do if we feel like it, do a podcast one day about American Beauty, because it's actually a movie that I just went through my DVD collection and I got rid of it today, actually, because I don't ever see wanting to go back and rewatch it.
Yeah.
And I kind of was on the fence about that anyway before the Kevin Spacey stuff happened. And then that was like, no, I mean, it's a movie about a guy who falls in love with a minor.
Yeah, I mean, the optics of that, given what Spacey has, been accused and credibly accused of, is
right.
But I will say, like, the things that I remember most about that movie are Wes Bentley's performance, Mendez's cinematography, and the score by, I think it was Mark Isham or James Horner, one of the two, but like those were just gorgeous aspects of a film. And, at the very least I can just download the soundtrack.
Yeah, exactly. There is a lot to like about that movie from the technical standpoint. Anyway.
Yep. Just read about it, kids. Just read about it.
Yeah, we can dissect that at a later time. But it's actually you voted for it to advance to take on the winner of the Philadelphia versus the Truman Show battle. Now, this is another one where we had Philadelphia going quite far. We actually had it going into the Elite Eight.
Mm-hmm.
You The listeners, however, did not.
No.
You had the Truman Show over Philadelphia 25-9.
This is so surprising. Like,
And I thought about it too, and it's I think part of this, again, I'm not trying to get into the listeners' heads or make excuses, but I think to kind of see their side of it, because I love both of these movies.
yeah.
I think they're
both amazing.
but I think Philadelphia is much more of a time capsule movie,
Very much.
and we've evolved so much in terms of how we talk about AIDS and the LGBT community that Philadelphia feels almost quaint.
Yeah.
So maybe there's just not that big of a desire to go back and watch it, whereas the Truman Show is still relevant.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. The Truman Show was relevant at its time, and it's only become more relevant with the boom of reality television. It's probably Jim Carrey's best on-screen performance of his career, and you're right about Philadelphia. Is just it bugs me because I think that contains one of my favorite scenes of an actor I've ever seen in my life, which is when Tom Hanks is listening to the opera recording and explaining it to Denzel Washington's character. I think that is just one of the best acting performances in that scene that I've ever seen in my life. But you're right, though. It's like the thinking on the LGBTQ community has evolved so much that you're right. It does almost seem like, wow, this happened. Like this actually happened.
Right.
And, like the thought of bringing gay people into court because they were fired for being gay, like that, that doesn't seem, I'm sure it's still, happens nowadays. Sure. But you're right. It seems kind of like, wow, like this doesn't even seem real.
Right. Exactly. And just the newsworthiness of the movie when it came out, that this was this major mainstream studio movie starring America's favorite leading
comedy man too.
Yeah, as a gay man dying of AIDS. It seemed like such, it was a bold, and I mentioned this on the last podcast, which is why I continue to vote for it, because it was so impactful for what it helped influence, that ultimately the things that it influenced, I think, built upon it, and we have a little more frank discussions about those issues today. Whereas if you go back and watch Philadelphia, they merely bringing up the issues was a victory in and of itself at that time.
You just came out of Reagan's presidency where he refused to even acknowledge it was happening. And, then you have this movie with these huge stars that were just up and coming, dealing with this just right out in the open. It was a pivotal moment.
Well, and of course, as a Springsteen mark, I can't ignore, and I can't believe I didn't mention it on the last podcast, the song Streets of Philadelphia, which is such a great song.
Did it win the Oscar that year? I think it might have.
It did win the Oscar that year. It was such a great song, and of course,
it's the boss, man. Come on,
exactly. He's on his way to that EGOT.
Yeah.
I think he's got the Oscar and the Tony, and he's definitely has the Grammy. He's just got to he'll get
him that Emmy somehow. Do a TV televised concert on PBS. Boom, we got you.
Here we go. Okay, so we spoke enough about Philadelphia, a movie that you didn't even vote for to advance.
Well, we have to do the postmortem. Come on.
So you ended up voting for the Truman Show to advance over Philadelphia, and then you voted for the Truman Show to advance over American Beauty.
So close.
It was a very close. It was 13-12 by one vote. The Truman Show advances to the finals of the drama region, and it ends up. So let's backtrack, because let's get to the elephant in the room finally. And that is our winner that we picked to win the whole damn thing. Interview with the Vampire. Didn't advance. It advanced out of the first round. You agreed with us there. And you actually don't agree with us past that. You allow Fargo. You vote for Fargo by a score of 14-10. Fargo advances over Interview with the Vampire.
Okay, it's Fargo. It's the Coens. Fine. I'm not going to complain, but I am going to complain because this is a 90s movie bracket. We're talking about the quintessential 90s movie. And as quirky and fun and groundbreaking as Fargo is as a dialogue like scene selection, you can't get better than the Anne Rice, Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, Antonio Banderas, a young Kirsten Dunst on like one of the key book series of the 1990s. I mean, that's why we voted for it. I mean, it's got everything there that you think of when you think of the 90s in film.
That is hard to argue. But at this, there is something, that's where these brackets get interesting, is when you have to dissect or compartmentalize 90s representation versus quality of
oh, come on.
I'm just, look, and again, full disclosure, I haven't, my wife's still mad at me because I haven't seen Interview with the Vampire yet. It's going to be on Netflix next month, so I'll probably check it out.
And but we will be watching it too.
Fargo's considered, one of the Coen brothers' masterpieces. It's a great movie.
It is a masterpiece. It really is.
It inspired a television show, so
which is also a masterpiece, apparently.
Yeah. And people still, they use the accents and all of that. So there is, it obviously had a lasting impression. I personally, I think, the Big Lebowski to me is the more quintessential 90s movie if we're talking Coen brothers.
Yeah.
But listen, I mean, I can't argue with people for just feeling like you kind of have to vote for the better movie in that round.
Yeah, I can't fault you on that. That's fine.
So, but if it gives you any comfort, it should let you know that Fargo, the listeners really liked Fargo because not only does it beat Interview with the Vampire, it beats The Truman Show in the Elite Eight to advance to the Final Four by a very close score, though, 9-6.
Again, though, very like the quirky fan base here, like Reservoir Dogs and Fargo. Like these are movies that have loyal followings, but you wouldn't think would show up in droves to vote for it. You know what I mean?
Hey, I guess that's the internet for you.
Connecting crazies since 1996.
Right. So, but yeah. So here's our Final Four. Our Final Four was Interview with the Vampire, The American President, Birdcage, and The Fugitive. Your Final Four, none of them. Not a single one.
Not one.
Your Final Four has Ace Ventura versus Reservoir Dogs, and on the other side, The Sandlot versus Fargo. So this is where we have just completely gone off the rails. We don't have to compare and contrast anymore. So in the Final Four, The Sandlot gets 8 votes and Fargo gets 6. So The Sandlot actually advances to the finals.
Yeah.
And it takes on Reservoir Dogs, which beats Ace Ventura by a score of 8-5. Jeremy, what
close matchups?
Yeah, close matchups. What are your thoughts on, since we didn't have those matchups, what are your thoughts there?
I can see the Reservoir Dog Ace Ventura thing, because I think you're right. Like the sequel and the direct to DVD sequels have kind of tarnished the brand name of Ace Ventura. I mean, I still think that is a very funny movie. And I think it's a lot more clever than people give it credit for in hindsight. But I mean, Tarantino has only gotten more famous. He's only gotten better as a director, I think. So I think there's a little bit of backsplash there, like, oh, it's Tarantino, it's one of his first, like, go for that. Sandlot, I mean, if you're going up against Fargo, I think that people would be more inclined to vote for the nostalgia and the thing they watched when they were kids. And, so both of those I can see, I think they make sense to me, but I think Reservoir Dogs, I guess, would be the more surprising of those.
Well, get ready to stay surprised, because Reservoir Dogs wins the NIT bracket listener vote. In a close matchup, it is, well, I guess not terribly close.
No.
By a final score of 5-2. Now, you might be asking yourself, how does the finals only have 7 total votes in it? Well, here's the deal.
Yeah.
18 of the 32 movies in this bracket received at least 1 vote. So that means 18 times each movie had at least one person. All 18 of those movies had at least one person fill their bracket out with that movie winning it all. So, yeah. So here are some other top vote getters. Reservoir Dogs at 5 championship votes. Ace Ventura, American President, Fifth Element, White Men Can't Jump all got 3. Fargo, Sandlot, and Wedding Singer all got 2. And then a whole bunch of movies got at least 1 vote. So we're kind of all over the map, but ultimately Reservoir Dogs is your NIT Brackify champion over The Sandlot.
Look, I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, like, the fan base is there. I mean, the Tarantino fan base is there. I mean, I'm sure Scott's probably, throwing his Cubs championship mug across the room.
Right.
But, I can't fault it. Look, it's a good movie. I mean, it really is. It's quintessential Tarantino. I mean, it really is. The witty dialogue, the fast pacedness of it, the unpredictableness. I mean, it makes sense. And so you're right. Like, the fact that there's so many people who chose to take it that far really kind of shows its staying power. And I think Tarantino's staying power as a director and as a force in the film industry.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the other thing, you do have the look of the suits, the soundtrack. There is some imagery from that film that we're all familiar with. And it's one of those things that's been parodied a lot. The cop torture scene. I was just watching. What was I just watching? I was just watching an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia that parodied that exact the Michael Madsen.
You can't hear Stuck in the Middle with You without seeing that anymore if you've seen this movie.
Yeah. So there you go. Now, I should point out, so as consolation to The Sandlot, it actually got the most total votes out of any movie in the bracket. So Sandlot was a clear favorite. It throughout the tournament, it got 73 total votes. Reservoir Dogs got 64. But again, these are in the popular vote. It does. It wins the popular vote, but not the electoral vote.
The electoral college.
And as we have all learned, it's those electoral votes that matter. So, and also just to one last point, it's ironic that a movie we couldn't even get out of the first round is voted by our listeners to win the whole damn thing.
We got our pulse on it, people. We got our hand on the pulse.
We do. We really do. We are, we're podcasters of the people.
Hey, we never said we were freaking great, movie podcasters here. We're adequate,
Yeah. All right. So, like I said, this one was all over the map. So let's get it. We've whetted your appetite. The appetizer is done. Let's get to the main course, the ultimate 90s movie bracket. So we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to rapid fire a lot of these because you and we all kind of agreed pretty much in a lot of these opening rounds, with a couple of exceptions, and I'll point them out as we get there. So let's start off with the comedy bracket. We all agreed with that while A League of Their Own is a great film, it doesn't advance over Home Alone. It gets crushed 193 to 57. I should point out too that the response to this bracket was huge.
Yeah, humongous.
We had 14,000 total votes cast, which translates to almost 300 people voting on this one. Like I said, a lot more. The interest for the big dance is always higher than the NIT, and this was no exception.
Yep.
But so, yes, Home Alone over A League of Their Own, 193 to 57. Groundhog Day over Clueless, 162 to 83. Mrs. Doubtfire over American Pie, 154 to 86. The Big Lebowski over Friday, 177 to 61. I'm going to skip to, let's see. Oh, and then we had Dumb and Dumber over Sister Act, 150 to 88. And then we had Wayne's World over Clerks, 152 to 82. So those are all the things that we agreed on. There were 2 matchups where we didn't agree. The first is Austin Powers versus Tommy Boy. We as a panel voted for Tommy Boy overwhelmingly by a 2-to-1 margin almost. Voted Austin Powers over Tommy Boy, 158 to 81. I gotta say, I'm not surprised that Austin Powers wins, but I'm surprised that it's that lopsided.
Well, I mean, I just think Farley has, kind of been forgotten, which sucks because the man was really, really funny. But I think Tommy Boy is just so indicative of, the 30s to 40s generation. I mean, I just don't think anybody really watches that movie anymore. Like David Spade, Grown Ups, I guess that was the last thing I've seen him in. I'm sure he's on some kind of sitcom on HLN or something like that. But yeah, but I mean, like Austin Powers, that brand built itself so well. And I mean, like Sarah and I just watched the first one the other day, and it's still freaking hilarious. I mean, like those Bond movies are timeless, so of course the parodies are going to be timeless too.
No, yeah, I agree with you. And I actually think I argued, as much as I love Tommy Boy, I think I argued, again, I'm going to put myself over. I argued for Austin Powers for the reasons that you would just mention, because while Tommy Boy, I think, is beloved for the people who watched it, I think it's also kind of forgotten that it wasn't a huge hit. It was a hit, but not a big hit. But the Austin Powers franchise, became a franchise.
Humongous.
The first movie did well, but then the second one did enormous box office, and the third one did even more than that.
Yeah.
So and you couldn't go anywhere in the 90s without somebody quoting Austin Powers or doing a Dr. Evil voice,
or the pinky in the corner of the mouth, like something.
Right. So it's one of those things that I think embedded itself into pop culture still to this day. Dr. Evil, Mike Myers still brings Dr. Evil out of mothballs every once in a while.
He was just on a late night show, right? Colbert, I think.
Yeah, it was Colbert. And he showed up on SNL a season or two ago.
And actually, I mean, news broke, I think today or yesterday, that they're apparently a fourth is moving. Like there are plans for a fourth one.
So couldn't be worse than Love Guru.
God.
That's fine.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah. So that's our one disagreement there. And then our other disagreement was in the 7 to 10 matchup, Office Space versus There's Something About Mary.
Yeah.
We went with There's Something About Mary. You, the listeners, went with Office Space. Again, in a not very close matchup, 2-to-1 ratio, 159 to 76. There's Something About Mary goes down to Office Space. And I think that kind of does make sense to me, because There's Something About Mary was such a huge hit at the time, and it was inescapable for it was at the top of the box office for like 8 straight weeks or something in 1998.
Yeah.
But Office Space is a movie that I think has aged more, and more people would quote Office Space today than they would There's Something About Mary.
Yeah, the cult following of Office Space has grown exponentially. And you're right, like There's Something About Mary, for as big as a first impression that it made, it does. I mean, like the Farrelly brothers made better movies after it, and like I would dare say before it as well with Kingpin, but that's just my opinion. So yeah, I think that it makes sense to me. I think that Office Space, you're right, like people can relate to working in an office like that. Really, when you think about it, that stuff really kind of hasn't changed. I mean, like working in an office, it's still all that crap that you deal with.
Right. And it's one of those things that once you get old and you actually work in an office, that movie becomes even funnier.
Oh yeah. I mean, just beating the hell out of a fax machine. I mean, come on.
Right. Everybody's done that at some point.
Yeah. Today, I mean.
So yeah, Office Space advances, as does Austin Powers, out of the first round. And what's interesting too is they don't just advance out of the first round; they advance out of the second round too.
Surprising.
These two make it all the way to the Sweet 16. Austin Powers ends up beating Dumb and Dumber by a score of 67 to 58.
Yeah.
And Office Space defeats Wayne's World 82 to 43.
Man, that just makes me sad to think that like people don't watch Wayne's World anymore. I mean, like, I get it. It is literally as early 90s time capsule as you can get, but it's still brilliant writing. It really is. I mean, like, and I mean, look, I like the fact I would have loved to have seen Mike Myers go up against Mike Myers there, because I think he was the most brilliant comedian of the 90s, if I'm being honest. So, I mean, but yeah, that just kind of saddens me, like that more people don't know Wayne's World.
Yeah, that's it is really interesting to me to think about that. And I think in much the same way, it's that what was huge at the time versus what's gained a following over time. And I think Office Space just proves that what we just said about it a couple minutes ago holds true when you put up against Wayne's World, which is you mentioned. Yeah, great movie. I can't count how many times I saw it when it came out.
Yep.
But very much a time capsule and maybe something that people aren't as readily willing to go check out.
Go check it out, people.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Go check it out. And then check out the sequel, because I think the sequel is
pretty funny, man.
Yeah, people sleep on that sequel. I think it's really
I mean,
really
just
good.
for the Graduate ripoff at the end is the best.
Because it gets weirder. The second one is much weirder, and it reminds me of early Simpsons in some of the writing and the side gags. So
look, no movie can ever be said to have gotten weirder unless they include Christopher Walken, which Wayne's World 2 does. So
so up at the other side of the bracket in the comedy region, we're still in line with all of you. We had Home Alone over Groundhog Day, as did you, 92-70, and then Mrs. Doubtfire losing to The Big Lebowski by a score of 87-74. So Home Alone
was closer than I thought it would be, honestly. Like Mrs. Doubtfire and The Big Lebowski, just because of the following. But yeah,
right, yeah, and I think we talked about that earlier. I think it's the difference between your childhood nostalgia, and it's maybe a demographic thing, childhood nostalgia versus college nostalgia, or whenever it was you watched Lebowski. But yeah, no, it put up a good fight, but it was not to be. The Big Lebowski advances, and it's going to take on another family film, Home Alone, and this is the closest matchup.
This matchup is insane, man.
Of the comedy. Home Alone 49, The Big Lebowski 50.
I mean,
it's about this as close as you can get. I mean, unless you needed to go to a tiebreaker, but yeah. So a lot of passionate followings for both. And I think Home Alone is interesting too, because it's got that Christmas following. So I think it's one of those movies that people still watch, which is probably why it has such a good showing here.
Yeah, but I mean, like the closeness of it only shows you how much The Big Lebowski is regarded. I mean, like Home Alone is an easy choice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just like, oh, I watch that every Christmas. Oh yeah, Macaulay Culkin. Oh yeah, he's putting aftershave on his face. Like, you know, it's easy. It's an easy choice. And the fact that so many people didn't make that and went with the cult following, went with something like Lebowski, that's really kind of cool, actually, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And they keep going with it because Lebowski advances over Home Alone, and it's going to face the winner of the two upsets here. Now, see, this is Austin Powers meets Office Space, and I should point out at this point, our matchups would have been Dumb and Dumber versus Wayne's World. So we had Dumb and Dumber advancing over Tommy Boy. You had Dumb and Dumber advancing and then losing to Austin Powers.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had Wayne's World beating There's Something About Mary. You have Office Space beating Wayne's World. So we have two completely different movies here. And ultimately, Office Space just keeps on trucking. It takes out Austin Powers 40-30.
This sets up a cult versus cult following matchup.
Yeah, 100%. That gets us to The Big Lebowski versus Office Space for the winner of the comedy region. And it's not close.
Nope.
2-1 margin. The Big Lebowski 35, Office Space 16. The Big Lebowski is your winner of the ultimate 90s comedy movie in the final four.
Yeah, that kind of shows me that Quirk versus Quirk, the fans of both of these movies got them there, and then they're like, well, yeah, Lebowski's better.
Well, of course, yeah, it is. I mean, it's, like I like Mike Judge, but he needs to learn how to end his movies. I guess is what
You don't like the building burning down. I got you.
Well, I mean, it's just, it's I said this on the podcast. I think Office Space is brilliant for 45 minutes and just fine for the next 40.
I can agree with that.
And Lebowski is bell to bell great. So I think Office Space has that Stripes quality to it where it's so good up front, you kind of forget that it loses.
Kind of forget the end. Yeah, I can see that.
So, all right. So that gets us to the next region, which is the action, horror, sci-fi reason, we're going to breeze through these real quick because there's only 2 matchups again that you disagreed with us on. You agreed with us on Jurassic Park over True Lies, and that again was 210 to 22.
Whew. Don't take it personally, Arnold.
We had the number 9 seed Speed over the number 8 seed Blair Witch Project, which you did as well. This was a little closer, 138 to 92. Speed advances.
Mm-hmm.
Men in Black over The Rock, 196 to 34. Independence Day over Tombstone, 180 to 49. Scream over Bad Boys, 169 to 59. And Terminator 2 Judgment Day over Face Off, 191 to 38. Again, all of these are right in lockstep with everything that we agreed on, so we won't dwell on them too terribly much.
And then came the bottom of the bracket.
And then came the last 2 matchups, ironically in the same bracket next to each other. So here we go. The number 7 seed Armageddon versus the number 10 seed 7, which I guess now in retrospect I should have flipped those so that 7 could have been a 7 seed.
Yeah.
But oh well. To hell with alliteration. So,
well, I mean, I just think that Armageddon, look, I mean, it still holds up as 90s kitsch in a way. I mean, it's very Michael Bay without being Michael Bay, but it's, I don't know. I think you've got similar kind of movies there, Independence Day, Men in Black, Speed. Those are all kind of in the same vein. And 7 is just a pretty unique horror experience.
Yeah, it is the outlier of this bracket. It's the only real, it's kind of a horror movie, but it's kind of a thriller. It's a bit of an outlier. So we actually voted for Armageddon to advance. You did not, however. You voted for 7. Another Kevin Spacey movie. I'm not, I'm just.
But I mean, in that one he plays a murderous creep. So I mean, you can kind of just be like, oh, okay, more appropriate.
Yeah. Oh, I can buy that. I don't have to root for him. Except that he kind of wins in the end. But anyway, I digress. But 7 crushes Armageddon 152 to 74. So it's not even close. So Armageddon, the 7th seed, wins, and that gets us to.
Oh man, I'm just gonna let you go on this one.
So, it was my first experience in the front row was talking about these movies, and I had appreciated everybody's takes on things. And I, assumed I was dealing with some level-headed adults. And then we discussed whether or not The Matrix should advance over Twister.
Boy, were you wrong.
The first wrong. Apparently, I was wrong because the panel voted for Twister over The Matrix.
Okay, look. Scott will tell you that this was his masterstrokes to try to guide the bracket in a way. Mm-hmm. I think at this time, this was very close to when Bill Paxton died.
Yes.
So I think there was a little bit of extra oomph there. And I think this was just the moment of, Twister is so 90s and, The Matrix, it can kind of exist anywhere. I will tell you this, Lou. If I had it to do over again, I would have voted for The Matrix.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Distance is giving me perspective here.
We can stop the podcast now because that's really all I was aiming for.
All right. See you later.
Was the mea culpa? No, but really, I mean, look, and it's no shot at Twister. I like Twister. I would definitely love to watch it again, and I had a lot of fun watching it. But The Matrix is The Matrix. It's a groundbreaking movie for special effects. It changed filmmaking and it changed the trends towards what action movies were. And you see that by all the Matrix ripoffs that came in the 2000s.
And brought an intellectualism to that kind of filmmaking.
Right, exactly. And because of it, people spent the next 20 years throwing money at the Wachowskis because they're like, well, I don't understand it, but The Matrix was big. Give them money, and
go make Speed Racer, guys.
Yeah, exactly. And then we get Channing Tatum as a dog.
Just go with it, people. Just go with it.
But But anyway, so the listeners validated me. Thank you. I knew we had very intelligent, discerning listeners because they agreed with me and they voted for The Matrix. Not even close. 170 to 56. It advances over Twister. And
I mean, you can't argue with the numbers, people.
I can't. And I can't even believe I had to, that was even of all the things in that bracket, that was the one one of the few that I was like, but this is just a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Well, and
you would think.
How wrong was I? Okay. So now that I've done my victory lap, let's move on because we're pretty much in lockstep all the way up till the finals here. Jurassic Park dominates speed 168 to 18. Men in Black over Independence Day in the Battle of the Will Smiths 116 to 58. Scream loses to Terminator 2 114 to 67. And then this is where we veer off. We actually had Twister advancing over Armageddon. You had neither of these films. You had The Matrix advancing yet again, as if maybe The Matrix might actually be a really good movie and should go far in the bracket. But anyway.
I mean, yeah, who knows?
Yeah,
this is erroneous. Hot takes here, Lou.
Yeah. It advances over 97 to 64.
By the way, just this quadrant, this 4 here, is pretty impressive. I would watch any of these movies right now.
Oh yeah, totally. And that's the 90s for, people talk about how great the 80s were, and it was a great decade. But when you actually look at the totality of the 90s, there was some really great stuff going on. And a lot of really kind of diverse stuff because action movies were kind of in a different speed at that, no pun intended, in that decade of just kind of trying all sorts of different things.
Yeah, they were throwing a lot of stuff at the wall and a lot of it hit.
Yeah, because if you look at like the final 4 here in the action bracket, you've got Speed, Men in Black, I keep wanting to put Speed in there. You have Jurassic Park, Men in Black, Terminator 2, and The Matrix, which are all just very, Terminator 2 and The Matrix I have a little connective tissue there, but aside from that, they're all really different films.
Yeah, 3 of those I would put on very strong contenders for the top 100 films of all time, and Men in Black is a damn good movie. I mean, and it's groundbreaking in its own right.
Right. Well, it's a good movie, but it's not good enough to beat Jurassic Park. This gets crushed.
Oh, destroyed.
132 to 20. Jurassic Park advances. And then The Matrix, that Cinderella story, that number 2 seed just keeps on chugging.
Man, it's just like saying this upstart Kansas team.
That's right. Yep. Those Duke Blue Devils, they'll surprise you every time. Okay, but The Matrix beats Terminator 2 61 to 37 in a
that's interesting. Yeah, I mean,
a close-ish matchup, I guess.
Well, I mean, if you think of quintessential 90s, I would think that this would be the one that would be pretty close with Arnold and the Terminator, and that movie was so huge. Matrix didn't really open huge, but it kept going with word of mouth. This one, Cameron just dominated the box office with T2.
Right. Well, and it's worth mentioning that The Matrix comes out. This is the beginning of the decade versus the end of the decade, because Terminator 2 is 91.
Yeah.
And The Matrix is 99. So
and both very groundbreaking with action special effects. So.
Right. Absolutely. And Matrix probably owes a lot of debt to Terminator 2.
I think so, actually.
Yeah. But not enough to let it advance.
No.
So that gets us to our genre finals. Jurassic Park versus The Matrix, the 1 versus 2 seed, and the 1 seed ends up taking it. Jurassic Park over The Matrix, 77 to 29. Again, not even close. Jurassic Park just steamrolls this whole region.
I mean, this is literally that Kentucky team a few years ago that was just boom, we're not messing around.
Yeah, no, not even. It's just, and it's hard to ignore. And the fact that we still have Jurassic Park movies to this day, one opening this month.
Yeah.
That tells you that this is a movie that's still beloved and has a lot to offer to an audience, because they're just going to keep remaking it and adding sequels to it till they can get the magic of that first film back.
Yep.
So that's one half of the Final Four, Big Lebowski versus Jurassic Park. Let's move over to the family and romance category.
Yes.
Again, I don't. Was there a gas leak or something? What were we doing?
Really, we were trendsetters here, because then UMBC decided to beat Virginia in the tournament this year, and I don't think that happens without us doing this one here.
They clearly were. They heard our podcast and said, "Well, you know what? If Hook can beat the Lion King, we can shock the world."
Now look, okay, I'm not the biggest Lion King fan. I really am not. I mean, I think it's a great movie, but it's like not even in my like top 5 animated films, if I'm being honest. But I'm not putting Hook over it. No. And I love Hook, I really do, but I'm not making that choice.
No, I it's interesting because as we did on the Disney bracket, I like the Lion King. I don't love the Lion King.
Exactly.
And so hell, I voted for Tangled over Lion King in the Disney bracket. And I think I don't know if I went with the crowd on this or not, but the listeners, they stuck with it. They went having it. They were not. They weren't. They were here for the Lion King. It advances easily, 193-36 in one of the more lopsided opening round matchups. It takes on Beauty and the Beast, which we had advancing over The Nightmare Before Christmas, 155-75. We're in lockstep there. We're in lockstep for the rest of this as well. Aladdin over Babe, 204-24. Whew. That may be the biggest blowout, I think, of the first round. And then Toy Story over Space Jam, 180-48. And I kind of thought that
would be closer.
Yeah. I thought so too, because the people who I know who like Space Jam love them some Space Jam.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we shouldn't be surprised. Toy Story is Toy Story, but yeah, I thought that would be a little closer.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. But it is not. And so because of this, because we blew up the bracket, we actually get Beauty and the Beast to advance over Hook, because eventually we came to our senses.
Yes, but I'm sorry. If you're giving me a Beauty and the Beast Lion King choice, Beauty and the Beast should be the winner of that. I mean, again, I don't want to disparage anyone who really loves Lion King, but Beauty and the Beast is an all-time great movie, and The Lion King is a really, really great animated movie.
I would agree with you, but I think for the purposes of this bracket, I think we also forget that Can You Feel the Love Tonight was a top 10 hit on radio.
Yeah.
For the 90s. And so the Elton John soundtrack, I think, gives it a little bit more of a 90s stamp to it than Beauty and the Beast does.
Yeah.
The Beauty and Beast soundtracks gives it to it. Aside from that, I would agree with you. I think Beauty and the Beast is a better movie, but I think when I think 90s, I would think The Lion King before I'd think Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, I can't fault you there.
Yeah. Well, and don't fault our listeners either, because they move Lion King over to the next round over Beauty and the Beast, 123-37.
Maybe that's where it is, because that vote should not be that lopsided.
Maybe. Hey, it is.
I'm pretty sure we did this way before the remake came out too. So, I mean, maybe that would have made a difference.
This is true. And so it ends up going up against the winner of Aladdin versus Toy Story. We voted for Toy Story. You voted for Toy Story, 115-62. So what's interesting is that Aladdin just crushes Babe and then gets crushed in turn by Toy Story.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's just prevalence. Toy Story's still making movies. Aladdin,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know when the Return of Jafar was, but or the 40 Thieves, but it wasn't within the last 3 years.
Right. And so that sets up a matchup of The Lion King versus Toy Story, which is different than our matchup of Beauty and the Beast versus Toy Story. But you agree with us, at least in part, that Toy Story is the best 90s family movie, because you vote for it to beat The Lion King by a score of 70-59, which is pretty close. So,
I mean, yeah, I think they got it right, but yeah, that's a pretty good close matchup. And I would like to think Beauty and the Beast would have been that close too.
Mm-hmm. It probably would have been. So that gets us to the romance category. And we are in agreement on the first matchup, Titanic over Empire Records.
Shocking.
Shocking, but not as lopsided as some of these others. Still lopsided. It's like a 3-1. It's 174-51. Titanic over Empire Records. And Pretty Woman over The Bodyguard. Pretty Woman gets 187 votes, and that
was lopsided.
Yeah, over The Bodyguard's 38.
Oof.
So yeah, that one was a no-brainer. And then also Jerry Maguire over My Best Friend's Wedding.
That was contentious, if I remember right, though.
Yes, because there was some very anti-Maguire sentiment that ultimately gets us in the next round. But Jerry was able to squeak by in the first round, and the listeners agreed 163-60 over My Best Friend's Wedding. So the only matchup where we disagreed here was Ghost versus Sleepless in Seattle. And this is actually the closest matchup of the first round. And it was back and forth for a while.
I remember that. Yeah.
These brackets have been up for a while. But ultimately, we voted for Ghost over Sleepless in Seattle. You did as well. Ghost gets 123 votes. Sleepless in Seattle gets 102. So Ghost actually advances. Oh, excuse me. Correct me. We voted for Sleepless in Seattle.
Sleepless in Seattle. Yeah,
we did. My bad. I was looking at the wrong bracket there. Yeah, we voted for Sleepless in Seattle. You voted for Ghost.
Look, I think we were playing up the Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan factor, the two darlings of rom-coms in the 90s. So, but Ghost is still a great movie. It's still very iconic. I mean, take a drink, everyone. But, I think it's probably what Swayze, it's one of what Swayze's at least most remember for. That and Dirty Dancing are probably 1A on that.
Right, exactly. And that pottery scene is embedded in the culture.
Yep.
So no arguments there. And it was a monster hit. I think people forget about just like what a big hit movie that was. It got nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah, and I mean, most people don't know this is the movie Whoopi Goldberg won her Oscar for, not The Color Purple or anything.
Right, exactly. So, there's a lot to like about Ghost. There's a lot to like about Sleepless in Seattle. But there's also a lot to like about Titanic, which crushes Ghost. Ghost advances over Sleepless in Seattle and then just gets slaughtered by Titanic.
Smashes that pottery.
139-22. So that rights the ship, no pun intended there, because we also had Titanic advancing over Sleepless in Seattle to make it to the Sweet 16. And then down below, we had Pretty Woman beating Jerry Maguire, and this is where things got contentious, I believe, because I argued for Jerry Maguire a little bit more. And the listeners, once again, you get me. We are just simpatico.
Yeah,
because they vote for they vote for Jerry Maguire over Pretty Woman by a score of 111-64.
Yeah, I mean, look, Scott and Craig were big on Pretty Woman. Their mom watched it a lot with them. I just think I chalk this up to Tom Cruise is just a little bit more prevalent than Julia Roberts is nowadays. I don't know if Jerry Maguire is necessarily the better movie. I mean, I know Cameron Crowe's career has gone quite downhill as a director since Jerry Maguire. So yeah, I don't know, but I don't hate it. I think that as long as they both lose to Titanic is the only thing. So
it comes, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it as much because I think this was one of our lightning round issues. But 4 words: show me the money.
Yeah, no, you're right.
It's like it or not, and I think that's why maybe there's some. It's one of those movies that was so ubiquitous that I think a lot of people rejected it, and also because it's in very much what we said about Aaron Sorkin. Cameron Crowe is a very unique style. Cameron Crowe's dialogue's a little different. It's a little heightened. It's a little more. It walks that line of earnestness and schmaltz.
Yeah,
and as he eventually falls off that cliff at about 2003. But
Elizabeth Town, what?
Yeah.
No, but you're right. Like that and You Complete Me. Like those are two lines that are used in other movies now. I mean, like still used. So
right. So right. People know that. And so that's one of those, again, movies that really permeated the culture. And so it advances, but ultimately it runs into the buzzsaw that is James Cameron's Titanic.
And rightfully so.
Right. Listen, I've mentioned it on the previous podcast. I'm not a huge Titanic fan. Um, I have no need to see it again. I didn't. I have issues with the movie, but I can't deny that it is, it's the juggernaut of the romance bracket.
Yeah.
Without question. I like Jerry Maguire. I think Jerry Maguire is a better movie than Titanic. Yeah.
Oh, come on
I
now.
said it. Send me your hate tweets. Look, Titanic is the first movie to win Best Picture without even being nominated for its screenplay. So that's
well, yes, the screenplay is not the strength of that movie. I will give you that.
No. So that aside, of course, Titanic was the pop culture moment of the decade. You could argue.
And I mean, that's why with the finals matchup there against Toy Story, I disagree. I mean, I understand. I really do. Toy Story is great. If Titanic's going to get taken down by a movie, Toy Story would be the one. But Titanic was everywhere. It stayed in theaters for over a year. It stayed in theaters for over 52 weeks, people. I mean, like, the people went so far to see this thing over and over and over again. That song was number one for so long. Like, that made Leo DiCaprio's career like legit. It legitimized Kate Winslet as a leading lady. I mean, it didn't do that for Billy Zane, but he's still trying.
Oh, God bless.
I think that is the ultimate 90s movie, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I can hear those arguments. I can listen. My senior prom, what the theme was, "My Heart Will Go On."
Bet you loved that.
Well, yeah. I just thought it was, I more or less reveled in the irony that this seminal moment in a teenager's life is being signified by a sinking ship. Like our
pretty brilliant.
It's so,
can't write that stuff, man.
Right, we're sitting there, and our photos were actually like made to look like we were on the deck of a ship. And it was like, are we on the Titanic?
Enjoy your future, kids.
Yeah, wow, it's all downhill from here. 3 months from now, we're gonna hit that iceberg known as graduation.
Oh man.
And anyway, but it doesn't. I'm sure we weren't the only senior prom that had a Titanic theme, because it was everywhere. It was inescapable for that time, for that moment. And the song was inescapable, all of that stuff. So I don't begrudge it for advancing. But again, Toy Story for the 90s was incredibly revolutionary.
Just as big too. Those toys were everywhere. I mean, like that really kind of brought, Pixar. I mean, it legitimized Pixar, but it made Disney take notice and go out of its way to buy it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a worthy winner there. I will give it that. And look, if you want to hear more about what I think about Titanic, we did a dish series on that. You can find that on our website. But this is fine. I'm okay with it. If it has to lose to something, I'm glad it loses to something like Toy Story.
Well, and lose it does, because Toy Story advances over Titanic 51-36 in a close vote. So that gets our third slot in the final four. So Toy Story wins the family, Titanic wins the romance, but ultimately Toy Story gets to advance to the final four to go against the winner of our drama bracket. So we have some interesting matchups here, and this is, I think, of all of the ones, this is easily the most contentious bracket.
These are hard. These are hard matchups.
It was really hard. And this is where I would say, in comparing the 80s and 90s, you can make an argument that the 80s might have been better for other genres. I don't think you can make an argument that the 90s is hands down a better decade for drama.
It's one of the best decades for drama, I think.
Period.
I think maybe only the 70s could compete with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as somebody who had to try to find the 64 most quintessential movies of the decade, I think I can speak to this, because it was a lot harder to fill the 80s drama bracket than it was the 90s drama bracket. But
Yeah, agreed.
So let's look at some of these opening round matchups. Forrest Gump easily dispatches of Thelma and Louise, 189-31. Braveheart advances over A Few Good Men, 137-83. Which again was in lockstep with us. Where's your Sorkin love there?
It's dead with Santiago.
Shawshank Redemption over Boys in the Hood, 184-36. Fight Club over Saving Private Ryan, which is, I know that one was a tough one, but 130-89. And then finally, Scott's favorite matchup, Pulp Fiction over Romeo and Juliet.
Yes, but notice like he couldn't even vote for Romeo and Juliet over Pulp Fiction.
Like, you know that he's got to feel pretty strongly against something if he's voting for a Tarantino movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So 173-48, Pulp Fiction advances. So those are the ones we agreed on. We had 3 matches where we disagreed. The first is our 8 versus 9 seed matchup, and that is Good Will Hunting versus Goodfellas. And this was a really close matchup.
Yeah.
We advanced Goodfellas. We advanced Good Will Hunting.
Yeah.
You advanced Goodfellas by a score of 115-105, 10 votes separating these two movies. And I don't think you could go wrong either way.
No, I mean, I think Goodfellas should have advanced. I think it's Scorsese's best in the 90s. So no, but I mean, like that's an impossible choice in my mind.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I think this is the period piece part of it where if I had to choose, I would probably go with Good Will Hunting because it represents the decade better for me. If somebody wanted to say, hey, what were some of the moments of the 90s, they'll say, well, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon were a thing. Here's their movie that they did,
And I mean, that speech on the bench by Robin Williams is one of the best movie speeches of all time.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas Goodfellas is a great movie. It's part of the larger body of work that is Scorsese. Yeah. And I don't know if it's reflective of any time period necessarily.
Yeah, I can see that.
So, but anyway, but the listeners disagree with me there. And I'm okay with that. Goodfellas advances. And then down below, we have the number 4 seed, Silence of the Lambs, versus the 13 seed, The Usual Suspects. Now, we went with The Usual Suspects. The listeners disagreed with us. They went with Silence of the Lambs, 161-59 over The Usual Suspects. I'm pretty surprised by that one, to be honest.
Yeah, but I mean, you gotta remember, dude, like, Hannibal, the TV show just came out, not too long ago. And I watched both these movies recently, and look, The Usual Suspects is still brilliant, but I think that twist has been parodied a lot now, that it kind of maybe loses some of its impact when it happens. And Silence of the Lambs is still just so solid. I mean, it works as a thriller, as a crime, a detective story, as a horror film. That's just really an insanely well put together movie.
No, yeah, absolutely. And so I love both movies, and it's interesting because I do think I've probably seen The Usual Suspects more recently than I've seen Silence of the Lambs. So, but and so for me, it's a little bit more fresh, I guess, in the mind, but still fresh in the minds in the listeners. And then in the last matchup of the first round in the drama, The Sixth Sense versus Apollo 13, we went with Apollo 13. You voted overwhelmingly for The Sixth Sense, 151-68.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's some Shyamalan hate permeating through us on that one. I don't know. I mean, now that he's back on top and making good movies again, I probably would have gone with The Sixth Sense here.
Yeah, I probably would. I don't remember which one I went with, but I can see both sides because I think, Apollo 13, Houston, we have a problem is still a line that everybody's familiar with, and
you can come right back with I See Dead People.
Right, exactly. And that big twist ending that The Sixth Sense has makes it, was such a shocker. And it was one of those movie moments in where everyone's like, oh, have you seen this movie? Oh, don't tell anybody how it ends.
Exactly. It was one of
You're not
those "Don't you dare tell anyone what happened." So, like,
right.
like, don't take that from them.
Right, exactly. And so you can see, and it was a huge hit and a huge kind of a moment, and then the moment kind of dissipated. Whereas I think Apollo 13 maybe has a little bit more staying power just as a film.
Oh yeah.
But so but anyway, it's going to advance. The Sixth Sense is going to advance, and so that's going to set up our next round. So we had Forrest Gump advancing over Good Will Hunting. You had Forrest Gump advancing over Goodfellas. So either way, Forrest Gump's moving on.
Yep.
It beats Goodfellas 115 to 52. And then down below, we had Braveheart versus The Usual Suspects. You have Braveheart versus Silence of the Lambs. Now, this is interesting because we actually have Braveheart advancing to the Sweet 16 over The Usual Suspects. You have Silence of the Lambs beating Braveheart
So
108 to 48.
neither of the movies that we chose.
Nope, neither one.
I honestly don't get this one because I don't know. I've seen Braveheart so many times. I think that movie is so thoroughly watchable, which is amazing given its subject matter and its brutality, and its length, quite frankly. I guess it's not terrible that it loses to something like Silence of the Lambs, but I don't know, man. I think Braveheart's getting shortchanged a little here.
Yeah, well, I mean, as somebody who wouldn't have even voted for it over A Few Good Men, I can't speak on that, but uh, I understand there's a lot of love for that movie. So we had Apollo 13 versus Shawshank Redemption. You had Sixth Sense over Shawshank Redemption. Either way, it doesn't matter. We both have Shawshank Redemption advancing to the Sweet 16. You
Rightfully
have it.
so.
Yes, you have it taking out the Sixth Sense 166 to 53. Or excuse me,
Mhm.
yes, 166 to 53. It's mowing through the competition here. Yeah, rightly so. It's going to advance, and it's going to take on it creates what I think ultimately for me personally is of brackets, because we both agreed that Pulp Fiction should advance over Fight Club, and it does 86 to 55 in our listener vote. And that does set up a matchup of the Shawshank Redemption versus Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, this is
Uh,
ooh, that's I mean, like, Pulp Fiction probably is one of the most responsible movies for changing the cinema landscape of all time,
mhm,
I think.
mhm.
Um, but man, there are no bad decisions in the Shawshank Redemption. None. Every scene in that movie is perfect and it's as long as it needs to be. And the performances are so good. It really is kind of niche versus more conventional, I guess, even though Shawshank is not a conventional story or movie. Like, so it's strange, but that kind of feels like the choice.
No, I think you're exactly right, and I was actually kind of thinking that while you were saying that. In that, one of these movies aired, in perpetuity on TNT,
Every
um,
weekend.
and and the reason it could was because a couple of minor content issues aside, it's got a very broadly appealing story, and
Yes.
it's gorgeously shot. It's beautifully acted. It certainly has mass appeal over it before Pulp Fiction, because I don't know. There's, I would think about the person that I would recommend Pulp Fiction to. I wouldn't
Uh-huh.
recommend it to everybody. I wouldn't tell my mom, "Hey, you need to check out Pulp Fiction." I know she's not going to like that movie.
Yeah.
Anybody I couldn't recommend The Shawshank Redemption to.
No,
You
it's
know,
it's a universal one there, yeah.
but that being said, Pulp Fiction, like you said, is a game changer in 90s culture.
Mhm.
100%. It makes Samuel L. Jackson a megastar.
It
It
revives
makes
John Travolta.
revives John Travolta. Star director, not just like this up and coming indie guy, but like as a big a star as the people in his movies.
Yep.
And like you said, there's so many imitators. The night, the imitators to Pulp Fiction. that to me, it represents the 90s more than Pulp, than Shawshank, even though maybe Shawshank's a maybe more mass appealing film.
Yeah, completely agree.
So you, the listeners, actually, though, go with the broadly, shockingly, the broadly appealing movie wins the popular vote. 63-49, Shawshank Redemption advances over Pulp Fiction. And then this gets us to our last matchup in this round for the drama, Forrest Gump versus Silence of the Lambs. Now, again, we had Braveheart advancing yet again. We had Forrest Gump versus Braveheart and Braveheart advancing. So we had Braveheart versus Shawshank Redemption. You have Forrest Gump over Silence of the Lambs, 82-39. Yeah. So we have Braveheart versus Shawshank. You have Forrest Gump versus Shawshank.
Yeah, I can only say I think that was just a personal preference on that day. If you asked me another day, it might have gone differently.
Yeah. And I, as the person who voted for Gump in that round, again, listeners, you get me. I again, it's not under, this is, I think, again, maybe movie quality of film versus cultural impact. Because I mean, there's Bubba Gump shrimp restaurants to this day you can go eat at. There are, Forrest Gump was this weird drama that also had like an insane merchandising wing. Like you don't see that in drama movies. Like, it's not, you can't like go get Goodfellas coffee mugs or something, But like Forrest Gump was just this weird outlier of hitting critical mass and cultural significance and
had the right star at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't watched that movie in years. I'd love to see how it holds up, but I can't be mad at it for advancing.
Yeah, and I mean, like I was gonna save my comments for the way that it advances to the final four as well.
Sure. Well, we're here. Go for it, because it actually does advance to the final four over Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, and this is where we differed. We put the Shawshank Redemption in. Look, I don't think anybody's going to bemoan either's choice if you go the other way. But you're right. I think that Forrest Gump, it's also a movie that has been parodied a lot because of it. And I think that because of that, people forget how brilliant it is and how the just simple idea of looking at history through the lens of somebody who doesn't comprehend it while it's happening is not just like a great time capsule for us and the people who live through it, but it's also a critique on how we don't recognize it in the moment either. We don't recognize the full scope of what's happening right now. And, like, I think that it's just a brilliant turn there. Tom Hanks's performance is like, Robert Downey Jr. says it in Tropic Thunder. It's like, it's the perfect line walk there. A little bit in either direction, and you might not get it. But also the technology in Forrest Gump, putting him in those historical clips. I mean, it's stupid how good that looks.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because, we ended up with three out of the four movies in this region the finals were from 1994. And you could have, all three were up for Best Picture: Forrest Gump, Shawshank Redemption, and Pulp Fiction. And, what's interesting is that of the three, Shawshank is the one that has probably today the most amount of popularity. Yep. And it would be a distant third at the time. Over even over that was also the same year, Four Weddings and a Funeral and Quiz Show. And it would, of the five, I think it was the one, it was nominated for as slightly fewer than Forrest Gump, but I think it was second. But no one saw that movie when it came out, and then it grew this audience and became this huge thing. So it's another example of a movie that's grown more popular over time versus a movie that really represents the time frame. And so I guess, to that regard, if my choice is Forrest Gump versus Shawshank, and you ask me what the better movie is, I'll say Shawshank. If you ask me what represents the 90s more, I got to say Forrest Gump because of all of that cultural stuff we've mentioned.
Yeah, I agree.
So you voted again, Forrest Gump, 47-36 over the Shawshank. So here is our final four: Big Lebowski, Jurassic Park, Toy Story, and Forrest Gump. So we are
We only had one difference there, and that
only
being
one
Forrest Gump.
difference, Forrest Gump. But it's a big difference because Shawshank Redemption is the one that we ultimately pick to win the whole bracket. We
Yeah.
pick it over Toy Story, and we eventually pick it over Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park beating the Big Lebowski to advance to the finals, which is the one part where we do agree because Jurassic Park takes out Big Lebowski by a score of 48-19.
As it should. That movie belongs in the finals. It really does.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know anybody who saw that movie in the theater was just blown away by it. You can, I can't say it's one of my favorite movies of all time, but I like it a lot. But I can remember my experience seeing it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And for a movie that isn't in even my top 10 favorite movies, the fact that it left that big of an impression on me the first time I saw it, I can only imagine what it was like to people who fell in love with the film and adore it and watched it, who maybe hold it in higher regard than I do.
I think it cemented Spielberg's skill as well.
Mm-hmm.
His prestige was already there, but his prestige as one of the best directors of all time goes there with Schindler's List, the next year. But Jurassic Park, I think, with all the stuff like how is he going to make this work? How are these dinosaurs going to work? That was a big controversy back then. How on earth can this possibly be good? And then it comes out and everybody's like, holy crap, he resurrected dinosaurs. He made it look that good. So it really kind of cemented Steven Spielberg as the most skilled director we have, I think.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to going back and watching it again because what I remember is I saw it a second time, but I saw it on home video on a smaller TV, and I was like, I'm good. I like you lose the scope of it. This is a movie I think that should be experienced in as big of a screen as you can get it.
Agree.
And so for me, that's part of the reason, I remember that second viewing experience kind of losing some steam and then just kind of, not going back to it. But I look forward to it because, I plan on going to see Jurassic World this weekend, hopefully. So that gets us to, we had Shawshank over Toy Story. You have Forrest Gump over Toy Story. So whichever way you slice it, Toy Story, it ends its run in the final four, and that sets up Forrest Gump actually beats Toy Story 33-17. Like I said, these numbers dwindle as you move forward because there's a lot of contention between what movies should win and what movies actually do win. So here's our finals, folks. We've made it. The ultimate 90s movie, and for you, the listener, it comes down to Jurassic Park versus Forrest Gump.
The votes here are insane.
This is insane because we actually have a tie
in the finals. How on earth?
In the finals? Both of these movies received 21 championship votes.
Ugh.
So in order to determine the winner, you go to the total votes cast. And this is and when you get to there, it's not so close. Forrest Gump gets 487 votes, Jurassic Park 657 votes. Jurassic Park is your ultimate 90s movie bracket winner.
Two observations here. One, I love that the championship match is that close. It's how it should be. Mm-hmm. And another one, this is what I had Titanic versus Jurassic Park in my personal bracket. But Jurassic Park, you want to talk about cultural moments, merchandising, that revived paleontology as a career. That movie did. That movie was everywhere. Again, Spielberg cements himself. It was a cultural phenomenon. So I'm very happy with it representing the ultimate 90s movie.
Yeah, I can't be mad at that at all. It's not, I will say, my final four, my personal final four, would have had, I believe I would have had Austin Powers, The Matrix, Jerry Maguire, and Pulp Fiction for me. And I would have actually, and I probably would have had it Pulp Fiction versus The Matrix and Pulp Fiction winning. But, all of these movies are so good, and all of these movies left such an imprint on the culture for so many different reasons. Yeah, I can't be mad at Jurassic Park winning. I really couldn't be mad at any of these winning. What's interesting though is that both of these movies get 21 championship votes. They don't get the most championship votes. That honor actually goes to the Shawshank Redemption.
So interesting.
Yeah. So it gets 23 championship votes. So it's still very, very close. But because it doesn't win enough head-to-head matchups, it and Pulp Fiction kind of eat each other up, because Pulp Fiction gets 13 championship votes. And then the fifth place with the most championship votes is Goodfellas. So,
hey, just like the NCAA tournament, man, the draw is everything.
Yeah, you're right. It is, because 4 of the 5 movies getting the most championship votes are all from the drama region, which I find really, really fascinating, because it goes to show how great were dramas in the 90s. But it's also clears the way for Jurassic Park, because it stomped everything, and because it won so big in its earlier matchups, it ends up winning the tiebreaker, because Forrest Gump had a lot more competition along the way.
You can liken that to in sports. If you play tougher teams on your way to the championship, you're more worn down.
Yep. And ultimately, Forrest Gump was worn down and was eaten by the dinosaurs. So
maybe that's how Jenny died. We don't know.
She was eaten by a dinosaur.
By the T-Rex.
Yeah. Oh, is that a metaphor for something? I don't know.
Let's see.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for participating. Again, it was so fun to watch these results pour in. And by the way, the discussion is not over. We're not closing these brackets. We're leaving them up on Brackify. We gave you a time frame to vote for this podcast, but we're going to leave it up. So if you want to go back or you want to share this bracket and you want to tip the scales, you could go right now and fill it out and be the deciding vote between Jurassic Park and Forrest Gump. So
be that person, people.
Go there. And while you're there, you can find all of our other brackets. The NIT is up there. The 80s bracket is up there. And even a secret bracket we haven't even done on the podcast yet.
Right, man. One that is already causing shockwaves throughout the network, people.
Yes, it is. It's a NIT version of our 80s bracket. So we will be podcasting about it someday, but if you want a sneak preview of what those matchups are, go to Brackify, make your votes count, and we will definitely be back to talk about it. But we got a lot of stuff going on with the Front Row Network. Jeremy, what can the people be looking forward to?
Well, for the rest of the month here, we're going to be having an episode of Classics with Brandon Davis. Even in the midst of doing a live stage show, he is doing a Classics on Sunset Boulevard, which is celebrating an anniversary this year. So you will not want to miss that. We've got a full disclosure coming up, of course, on Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom that's going to be opening soon. And in league with that, Scott McFarland will be releasing Jurassic Park as his flashback episode. We also have episodes of Are You Afraid of the Podcast? 2 new ones, The Tale of the Hatching and The Tale of Old Man Corcoran. We got zone-episodes of episodes called 22 and The Odyssey of Flight 33. And then, of course, we are going to try to do a special episode with the cast of the musical Sister Act out at the Muni to talk about the film that musical is based on. And then, Lou, I believe you have an episode coming up.
I do. We actually just yesterday recorded a special double feature of Guilty Pleasures. It's a supersized episode. We cover the 3 Men and a Baby franchise, 3 Men and a Baby, and 3 Men and a Little Lady. We get into some stuff there. We have a lot of fun awesome. Talking about breaking down both movies. And we also announced our poll for our July episode, which I'll put a plug in now, because if you hear this now, it's up on Facebook right now. It's up through June 26th. And it is blockbuster themed, and it is for our July episode. Your choices are 1998's Godzilla, a movie that is not on this bracket for obvious reasons, and it's going up against 2008's Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
You want impossible choices, people? I can't choose, Lou. I cannot choose.
I'm happy either way. I've been on record. I said this on the other podcast that I think if Indiana Jones wins, it may be the episode that makes the internet hate me, or I don't know. It's going to be our most contentious episode because I don't know anybody who doesn't have a strong opinion about this movie. But if it does, but if Godzilla wins, we get to talk about P. Diddy and Jimmy Page, and so I'm okay either
Matthew
way.
Broderick is an action star. Why not?
Right, absolutely. So yeah, definitely be looking forward to that. So we've got a lot of stuff coming up. Please make sure you go to our website, thefrontrowmoviereviews.com, which I understand is possibly changing.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Changing probably shortly after this drops. You will be finding our new address very soon.
Excellent. But in the meantime, you can also go to our Facebook page where you can vote on our Guilty Pleasures episode. You can follow us at Front Row Reviews. You can follow me on Twitter at The Fake Lou Hair.
You can follow me at JGeck, JGOECK.
And check us out. Let us know what you think about these brackets. Let us know. And if you're watching us on YouTube, leave comments, share this video, subscribe to the podcast, listen, rate, review, tell your friends and tell your enemies, tell everybody to come in and, whoever, and let them share in all this stuff that we're doing, which is a lot. So I think we got everything. Did we miss anything?
Nope, we did it.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Jeremy, for joining me. This has been been a lot of fun talking 90s movies again. We will maybe someday we'll break down American Beauty and
yeah, we'll try to stay level-headed.
Or maybe we just steer clear of that whole thing. I don't know. But okay, so for all of us at the Front Row Network, I'm Lou Hare.
I'm Jeremy Geckner.
And as always, we'll see you in the front row.
Peace. All right, man.